So in general, Alex, the models are responding to the shear in the atmosphere differently. The GFS continues to say, well, I'm going to be able to stand up against all that shear to the point where I'm going to get steered by those middle upper level winds and head toward Hispaniola. The other models are saying, no, I'm not going to be able to withstand that shear, and I'm going to be at lower levels steered by, that lower level
and
flow.
Barely, right?
And not very quickly. But eventually, even if the GFS is right and it gets to Hispaniola, it would stall there, or it stalls just south of Jamaica. In any case, these are all bad scenarios for one or more of these islands because category slow arguably is even worse than whatever category it is on the wind scale.
Yeah, we look at that forecast, that GFS, that would take it up to Hispaniola. We know the vulnerability, the susceptibility, and then some of the other storms putting it closer to not Puerto Rico, but Jamaica. We've got a decent bit of terrain there as well.
Yeah, farther west is worse for Jamaica, but it's still bad for Hispaniola. Yeah. If it does hold together in the next 2 to 3 days and is actually steered into Hispaniola in the spite of that shear, that's absolutely a horrible situation for that area. And that would be in this case where the GFS is brought northward by this trough and it isn't sheared a lot. It's just steered into Hispaniola. But then when it gets there, that trough passes us by. So it takes 2 days to get to Hispaniola, and then it spends 3 days in Hispaniola. So that's why that scenario would be so terrible. However, if you take the ensembles of the GFS at face value, that's a low probability event because most of the GFS ensembles sit south or go in the general direction of Jamaica. Not very many of the possibilities actually take it over Hispaniola.
All right, so it seems like a mess right now. At what point, people always, we live in a society where we want answers, right, every moment. At what point do you think we'll have a better idea if the shear, stays strong or if it's able to start to move in the direction of the outflow?
End of this work week, because, give it 2 days for that main trough to pass by, and then you will have a better idea of whether or not it has made it northward into Hispaniola or not. But I think that's the less probability event because this trough looks like most of the models are consistent with this scenario. The trough passes by and then the ridge moves into the north and it starts moving slowly westward. I think in the overall scheme of things, this overall scenario is bad for Hispaniola and even worse for Jamaica because the highest likelihood is it spends a lot of time moving slowly very near Jamaica and doesn't exit until next week. And let me show you why. So the Euro has a couple of scenarios that go to Hispaniola, but look at how many of them sit just south of and then slowly near Jamaica. I'm really concerned about Jamaica here.
And then that would also allow the storm to be more over water, perhaps strengthen more significantly. So then in addition, it feels like to a rain event, we may be looking at a more substantial wind event too for Jamaica, depending on how close it meanders.
We could end up getting both. But this SpaghettiOs kind of pattern with so much time likely spent just south of or over Jamaica, that's why this is a very concerning scenario for Jamaica. And all of these are still bad for Hispaniola.